After everything that happened, I was told by my therapist to write it all down. It's supposed to make things easier to write it down and read it over. And when I am ready, I'm supposed to share it with someone who I know won't judge. Well, I decided to share it with you because, well, I know you. I know the people you know. If there's any way to bring my family back, you will do it. Everyone tells me they're dead, but I have to believe that they're still out there. I will start from the beginning. It was a little over 2 years ago when we moved to our new house. We had to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city and into the peace and quiet of western Vespucci. And in the beginning, the house was perfect. 2 stories, not counting the attic and basement, 5 acres of land, and even a massive garden with paths in the backyard. It was the best place we found for my wife and 2 kids. My wife, Vanessa, was a programmer working for Isaac's Industries, so she could work from home, even from somewhere as isolated as this. My daughter, Ada, who was 6 at the time, was excited to be living in such a new place. She was homeschooled, so she wasn't losing any friends. And we recently had a new baby who was just born. Little Adrian. It was for him that my wife and I moved from city life. Sure, there was a lot going on in the city, but after the apartment just next to us got broken into, we had to move. So this new house was just perfect. Even if it was a kilometer away from town, we had just about everything we needed. My wife could work from home, and I could finally garden full time as a hobby. I was a stay at home dad and always have been since I graduated secondary school and I married Vanessa. 5 years later, Ada was born, and things have just been perfect. The first few weeks in the house were quiet, almost serene. My wife would work on her programs, I would watch over the kids, and when Adrian was napping, I would work out in the garden with Ada. It would mostly be me, but she would try to help also. But for the most part, she would help dig for a few minutes, before she would go around playing pretend. She told me that there were little fairies in the garden, but unlike the fairies in her books, they didn't have wings and they had sharp teeth. More than once I saw her have full conversations in the garden, including laughing and pointing, but as far as I could see, there was nothing there. It was normal for children at her age to have invisible friends, and it felt like a good thing for her to be so creative, even at a young age. As we removed all of the old plants in the garden, Ada told me that it was making her friends angry. She told me that they ate the berries and fruits from the garden, and I was now removing them. Deciding to play along, I promised her that as soon as all of the old plants were removed, that we were going to plant all kinds of new food. Raspberries, blackberries, strawberries, tomatoes, zucchinis, and even spinach, and that there would be plenty for both her and her little friends. And this seemed to work for a while. One of the downsides of living so far from town, it takes time for things to be delivered to town. While the town had a farming store with seeds made for farms, none of them were suited for gardening. Lots of modern crops in farms can only be planted once and don't produce seeds that could grow into new crops. So farmers had to keep buying the same kinds of crops over and over again. This wouldn't work for us and our garden, so I had to special order organic seeds that had to be brought to a P.O. box in town, and that would be at least 2 months out. The war with the Seven Cities meant that the seeds had to be shipped from the Triple Alliance. So it had to be shipped across rivers, deserts, forests, and mountains, some by train, some by truck, and at least some of it by horseback, because the roads in this part of Vespucci were never quite paved, but always promised to be paved. So when I came home to give the news to Ada, she turned pale. Does that mean the Nunumbi are going to starve? He asked me, and I shook my head. No, baby girl. We'll leave out some food for them so they still have plenty to eat, I told her. At first, I tried to bring out an empty plate full of imaginary food, but Ada wouldn't let me go outside unless I put actual food on the plate. You'll make them angry. They'll be so mean when they get angry. They already don't like you. You don't want to make them angry. I agreed to grab a few sandwiches and we put them on the plate while we went outside. When we made it to where the garden was, I set the plate down and Ada immediately tried to pull me back into the house. They won't eat while you're watching. You have to go back, she told me as she pulled us back into the house, and I agreed. As we went back into the house and we played pontoon for about an hour before we went back outside. Ada told me we had to step slowly and quietly as she led us to where the plate was left. And sure enough, the plate was empty, and we took the plate back, but that was strange. There weren't any wild animals in the area. The Nunumbi couldn't possibly be real. I know lots of people talk about the veil and about how esoteric creatures live among us, but I didn't believe it. No matter what news filtered from the northern forest or the seven cities, there was only the physical world. Maybe Ada found a pet crow or something that could eat the sandwich. That's what I told myself each time we took food out and it disappeared. But even as we kept up this ritual of bringing food out into the garden, other strange things kept happening in the house. Small things at first, like disappearing food, usually sweets or candies. When I confronted Ada about this, she told me that the Nunambi were still hungry and they were looking for more food. At this point, I was getting a little annoyed. Look, there's only so much food in this house. Whether it's you or your invisible friends, we don't want food disappearing. Your friends will get fresh fruits when the seeds get here. If more food disappears, they're not going to get any, I told her, and for a little while, food stopped disappearing. But other things kept vanishing. Paper clips, pencils, rubber bands, medication, buttons, and small electronic parts. At first, I thought it was Ada, but she couldn't open the childproof caps. She didn't go into Vanessa's office, and she had no idea where the electronic parts were, let alone what to do with them. Vanessa had no idea what was going on, and I was rapidly getting onto my last wit. I noticed red marks on my skin, especially around my legs and arms, and there were small pinholes in the drywall, and I noticed the marks on Vanessa also. The last straw was when I noticed the same marks on Adrian. There was no exterminator in town. I checked, so I bought some flea powder and a pest chemical to spray around the house. So while Ada and Adrian were with Vanessa in town getting malts, I sprayed the outside of the house and sprinkled the powder all over the floors. I must have caused a panic among the fleas because I kept feeling bites as I spread the powder, and then I vacuumed it up. When Vanessa and the kids came back, everything seemed normal. until Ada tried to bring the sandwiches out for the Nunumbi. She came back with a full plate and she was crying. They won't eat. They won't talk to me. They won't move. They're just laying there. Are they going to be okay? She asked me as I shushed her, and I tried to reassure her that her invisible friends were just tired and that they were all right. I didn't tell her about spraying around the house or in the house. Did she know somehow and it was affecting her imagination? I decided to ignore it and continue with my routine. Nothing else went missing. Ada kept trying to bring sandwiches out, but she gave up after a few days. She said she couldn't find the Nunumbi anymore. So I just kept digging up the garden. The last of the old plants were gone, and the soil was nice and loose. Though I did find some odd things in the garden. A bunch of the soil, far from the plants, had little white sticks in them. They weren't very big, but they broke easily. I got splinters with them pretty easily. But there were paper clips, small brown sticks with a string tied to it, making it like a bow, and in a few spots I found a woven patch of fabric. Not very large, maybe 5 centimeters long and 2 centimeters wide, but beautiful designs that reminded me of some of the patterns I'd seen sold by the weaver in town. Maybe she made small patterns too and they got into the dirt. I just threw them away in the trash with everything else, but it seemed interesting even as I continued my digging, waiting for my seeds to arrive. One night, though, Ada came to me, excited, and she told me that she saw the Nunumbi again. She told me that they came to visit her and that they were carrying long spears dipped in white powder now. I just nodded and listened as she told me that they were forming an army in the garden. She had such a wild imagination. She told me about how most of them were poisoned, and how when their dead died, they couldn't even be eaten properly, like how they were supposed to be. So they had to bury them so no one would eat the poisoned flesh. She had such a wild imagination. Cannibalistic, wingless fairies. After she got done telling me everything, we went to sleep, and that night was a nightmare. I woke up when I smelled what smelled like burning pork. I opened my eyes and I could see orange light from the backyard. I tried waking Vanessa a few times, but her eyes remained shut. So instead, I decided to go outside to see what was going on. I was expecting to see the distant neighbors throwing a bonfire, or maybe one of Ada's toys that were left outside. What I saw outside was a very large cooking fire. Two large pieces of meat were left among the coals, one about the size of a pig, and the other was much smaller, maybe a chicken or a turkey. Weird, who would be cooking at this time in my house? I asked as I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I never went anywhere without it, not even to bed. I called the police and informed them that someone was trespassing on my property and they started a fire. They informed me that they would be there in 10 minutes. So, while they were coming, I put out the last of the coals with a bucket of water and I got a closer look at the meat. It smelled like pork, but the outside was cooked until it was burnt with the meat underneath just barely cooked. The blood was still dripping onto the warm, wet coals. Large chunks of the meat were carved out, and I noticed something odd in the coals. A few scraps of fabric that looked very familiar. When I realized why I recognized the fabric, my heart froze and my breath caught in my lungs. That was Ada and Adrian's pajamas in those coals. That wasn't possible. That that couldn't be them. The bodies had no heads, and the limbs were carved away, leaving only the torsos, but now I had to know. I ran into the house, checking Ada's room first. Her bed was empty. No, this can't be happening. Please don't let this be happening, I said as I ran to Adrian's room. And when I saw his empty crib, I screamed. I screamed loud enough I was certain that Vanessa would wake up. I ran back to our room and she was still asleep. Wake up, please. Our children are missing, I pleaded with her. But when I tried to shake her, she was stiff and cold. My wife was dead. I fell to my knees, not believing what was happening. Why was this happening to me? We left the city to avoid something like this, and yet still happened to us. At that moment, though, I saw something moving in my wife's hair. I focused on it, and for the first time ever, I peered past the veil to see the truth. On my wife's head, only 4 centimeters tall, was a small man. He had armor made from what looked like buttons and string. His spear was made out of a paperclip and a sharp thorn, with white powder on the tip of it. The same powder that I used for killing fleas. The same powder, I just realized, I used to kill Nunumbi. Why my children? Why my wife? Why not me? I asked the small man. He paused for a moment before he responded. His voice was a lot louder than I was expecting him to be, and he seemed so angry with me that his anger turned cold. You killed our children and our wives. You left us alive, not even able to eat their flesh without sharing their fate. And then you dug up their graves and threw their bodies away. You left us alive to see. You left us alive to starve. And you left us alive to fight back. We won't starve now, and we left you alive knowing that you did this. But unlike us, you won't get a chance to fight back against us, he said before vanishing into the darkness. The police arrived soon after. They found me staring at my wife, and they found my children outside in the backyard. My wife was poisoned, but my children, they died from smoke inhalation. From what the forensics experts were able to figure out, Ada carried Adrian willingly down to the fire, and she sat there, dying from the smoke before she ever started burning. A small comfort, I guess, but what followed afterwards? Movies always end at the moment of the big murder. They don't show you what comes after the police arrive. They just want you to think that the police make everything okay again. Things would never be okay again. But that night, I thought I hit rock bottom. Turns out, there is no rock bottom. Just a bunch of cliffs you land on for following further. Vanessa didn't name me in her will, nor her life insurance. She named our children. The bank account wasn't in my name, it was hers. She just would pull out cash for me. With the children gone, I thought that I would be able to claim her finances as my own because I was her spouse, but her parents fought me every step of the way. They wanted the money for themselves, and they hired a lawyer to argue, since my wife didn't name me in anything, that she didn't want me to have anything. The police ultimately ruled I wasn't the murderer, but the court of public opinion had no love for me. I had to sell the house and move back into the city just to get away from all the stares and whispers. But I never had a job before, so finding one in the city was hard. But eventually I managed to become a can stacker, and I'm staying in a studio apartment that I'm almost certain is infested with termites. I don't know what to do now. I'm over 30 years old. I don't have the education for a better job. I don't have the experience to find somewhere else, and I'm not attractive enough to attract someone to take care of me. My life has been ruined because of the Nunumbi, but my Vanguard therapist recommended I write this down and share it with a trusted source, and that's what made me think of you. I, I know it's a long shot, possibly the longest long shot in the history of long shots. But back in secondary school, you were obsessed with the supernatural. Surely you know some kind of way to bring my family back? Some kind of spell, sacrifice, charm, deal, something? Anything? I'm desperate, and I need some kind of way to bring them back. Everyone tells me it's impossible, but please, if there's a way to bring someone back from the dead, please tell me. Narrator's note. I did know this man in secondary school. I didn't know a way to bring back the dead then, and I don't know a way to bring them back now. You have my condolences for what happened, but nothing you can do will bring them back. You will need to find a way to move on. If you let this consume your life, you won't have a life to live.